Hello everybody and welcome back to the video that you have all been waiting for. It is part 1 of my Overwatch League 2020 season pre-season power rankings. If you've been here before, you know how these power rankings work. It's split into 2 parts. Part 1 will be covering teams 20 through 11, and part 2 will come out on Friday and cover teams in the positions of 10 through 1. I'm going to try to keep this video from getting too long. It means I'm not going to be able to give my full thoughts on every single team. If you want more thoughts on any team, I have already talked about them all in their own videos. So I'll have a link in the description as well as in the cards and at the end of the video to the playlist of my videos where I talk about all the 2020 stuff. With the Overwatch League included in that are the 20 team videos. Some of those videos may be a little outdated, so I'm going to try to make sure to touch on anything that has changed since I've made my video on any given team. So, just noting that, but I'm going to try to be brief, give my reasons why I like the teams, give reasons why I don't like the teams, and then explain why I have them in the positions that I have them, and then move on to the next team. And try to do that relatively quickly so that these videos don't get to be insanely long. Now, obviously, as I always say every time I make a power rankings video, this is my video, and these are my thoughts and my opinions. They may differ from yours. That's fine. I would love to have discussions with people about everybody's own opinions, and I think that is very, very awesome. And I love when people give me their thoughts on teams. So please in the description down below, or in the comments down below, let me know if you disagree with where I put any of these teams. I'd love to hear your opinions. But with that being said, let's jump into the actual power rankings, where we start with the number 20 team, the Boston Uprising. Now, since I've actually talked about the Boston Uprising, the only move they made was the addition of Brusen, the flex tank from the Netherlands. Which is a fine move, but I'm also not going to say it's a great move. He's a player who played well at the World Cup. We'll see what he plays here. It's not a big kind of game-breaking move. My big thing with the Boston Uprising is I think they made some decent moves, bringing in Myeonbong and Swimmer. I think the additions of Jerry and Munchkin are going to be interesting to see how they work out. I still think Colorhex is going to be their starting hit-scan DPS player. Boston has always been playing with this philosophy of having the talent that they just kind of find, these diamonds in the rough talent, and it can work. It didn't really work for them well last season. They've kind of completely rebuilt with the exception of Color Hex, Axiom, and Fusions. And so they're going in completely new now. They have a new head coach and some new assistant coaches and all that kind of stuff, but I'm very worried about the way this team is built. And for that reason, I'm a little bit concerned about how they're going to perform. And I have them here at the bottom because I have too many questions about this team and whether or not they'll actually be able to succeed, that I put them down here at number 20. Next, at number 19, is the Los Angeles Valiant. Now, this is a team that made some good moves. Kind of. They got rid of a lot of players. They let a lot of players go. Obviously, Space and Kariv and Agilities, and then Custer retired, so they got rid of a lot of really big name players. And then they didn't add a bunch of big name players. They went for the Moneyball, Diamond in the Rough approach. They added Dreamer and Apply and Lastro and Gig and Rain and KSP. Now, KSP is probably the best player they added. Just when you look at his track record in contenders, like, he's really good. Obviously a player from the UK. But once again, this is a team where they went for the kind of diamond in the rough strategy. They don't have a lot in terms of remaining talent that's really, really good. I either like KSF, and I think Shax is good. And I think McGravy's pretty good, but I don't think he's incredible. But, KSF is the longest tenured player on this team right now. I think he's really good. I think he's going to have a better year now that he can go back to playing flex DPS. But I just think ultimately they don't have the same level of talent as a lot of these other teams. They're in a very tough conference and a very tough division in particular. I think it's going to be tough for them to have a really good season. It's going to be tough for them to find wins. I think they're going to struggle for that reason. And with the travel, I think it's going to be even more difficult for a lot of these teams that are kind of thrown together and don't really have that chemistry. And I think this is going to be the type of team that struggles in a season where it's going to be a lot of travel when you don't have the same synergy that you would have if you were on a pre-established team. So for that reason, I put the Valiant here at 19. I think they could be good. I think they made some better moves late in the offseason, bringing in Gig and KSP. I think those were two really good moves. But ultimately, I don't think that they are at a position right now where they're going to be a really, really, really big contender. Up next, at number 18, I have the London Spitfire. London Spitfire completely cleaned house. The only player they still have from last season is Krillin, who never really played. Everybody else on this team is new. They have a full 12-player roster where they brought players in from all over the league. Bernard and Fuse coming from Fusion University. Glisser's coming from Seoul Dynasty's academy team. I don't know why I can't. Genji. Shui, I think, is coming from Runaway. J-Mac is coming from LGE. Huya. Like, they have players coming from everywhere. And I'm not super confident in this thing that they did where they got rid of a bunch of superstar players, including Prophet, obviously. And they brought in a ton of not very well-known players that don't have a lot of history with each other. Some of them do, like Bernard and Fuse played together, and that's something that is noteworthy. But a lot of the players they brought in have no history with each other. You have a player like Sanguinar, who comes from Gen B, which is like 2 teams below Gen G in their hierarchy. Also someone from Gen S, which is below Gen B. Like, this team is very weird with what they did. Yes, it's although comes from Gen S. So this team is very weird. I think that they have a coaching staff that I trust with Agape, awesome guy Pavan, and Twinkle. I think it's a very good coaching staff that'll have success because of that. But ultimately, I think that they're not going to be a fantastic team because, once again, what they've done and the travel they're going to have as the team representing London is much, much higher than some of the other teams. No, they may not base themselves in London. They may just base themselves in the US somewhere, like we see with what Paris Eternal are doing. But London is a team that I think will struggle. I don't think they have a very talented roster. It's not a bunch of new players they brought in that are well known. They once again went for these diamond in the rough players, and it could work out really well for them. It could not. These bottom 3 are very similar in the way that they built their rosters. I'm worried about what they have done. I'm worried about what they have going forward. And I kind of see this team as very similar to the 2017 squad, where we're probably going to see a bunch of players. Like, we're going to see a lot of swapping between players, and I don't think that really works very well. And then they're going to eventually settle on a roster and probably cut a bunch of the fat off, if you will, and get rid of some of the players that they don't need anymore. But I just think this roster is really big with not a ton of promise, and that's why I have them here at 18. Next, we have the 17th spot, which, speaking of the Paris Eternal, it is the Paris Eternal. Now, the Paris Eternal actually made a lot of very good moves to their to improve their team in the offseason. Of course, they brought in Z, and they brought in Sparkle and Hanbin, all of whom come from Korean contenders. More specifically, they all come from Element Mystic, which was the team that was the best team in Korea in 2018 or 2019. Sorry. So they bring in 3 of the players from the best team in Korea. They bring in the head coach from that team, which is Rush. They bring in 9K as a general manager. 9K coming over from the San Francisco Shock. They bring in Aid and they bring in Levi as assistant coaches. They did a lot of really good things to improve this team. The problem is, they bring in Sparkle and they bring in Hanbin. Neither of them will be able to play at the start of the season. Now, Hanbin will be able to play pretty quickly. He'll be able to play on February 20th. That's when he turns 18. That's only about 3 weeks into the season, so that's not that big of a loss. Sparkle, on the other hand, who is a very well-regarded, highly regarded player, isn't able to play until May 31st. So they have to go a large portion of the season without their best player, and the rest of the roster has to basically play well enough up until he's able to play, so that then when he's able to play, they can sub him in, and then they have to hope they're doing pretty well. And I'm not super confident in the rest of this roster. I'm not super confident in the European side of this roster. Their main tank is either Ben Best or No Smite, neither of which I'm super confident in. Yes, they have some options in their support line. You know, in main support, they can run FD God or Cruz. They have Gray, and they have Ben Best, or not Ben Best, they have Hip. They have some options there. But ultimately, I look at this team, and I just think it's very mediocre, and they have to really hope that when their Korean players are of age and able to play, that they can perform really, really well. If not, I think they're going to struggle, and that's going to be a huge, huge issue for this team going forward. I feel very worried about what they have going forward. I have just worried about what their team is right now. That's why I have them at the 17 spot. I think they have a potential to be really good, but there's a lot of risks that I see that keep me from putting them too high. Next is 16, where I have the Florida Mayhem. Now, the Florida Mayhem are an interesting team. They had a good season last season, a good end of the season last season. And one of the things that they did that I thought was very, very interesting was they had a very good Stage 4. And then in the start of this offseason, they made a lot of really good moves. They got rid of 5 players. They got rid of Swan and DPI and Zephyr and Rain and Hagopun. And everyone was like, okay, cool, they're going to make a lot of moves this offseason to become better. And then they signed 2 players, and that was it. They signed Gangnam Jin and Yaki, which are 2 very good additions. And I really like those additions, and I think they make their team better in every way. Gangnam Jin is a flex support player coming out of Korea who's very good. He's going to probably, I would assume he's going to play over Byram. I think he's better. You have Yaki, who's a DPS player, who's going to play alongside Saya player. Those 2 players are good additions, and they're very, very much needed for this team. But the problem is, you look at the rest of this team, and you say, okay, well, Chris was okay. Gargoyle was good in 2 metas, so you're like, okay, well, that's a bit of a question mark. They probably should have added another flex tank. Fate's your starting main tank, which is fine. Korean's your backup, okay. And then you got BQB as your backup DPS player. This team really needed to make some more moves. I like where they are at right now. I think they're pretty good. I think they're not good enough. They do bring in Kuki to be their head coach. Obviously, he was the head coach of Runaway. He's, I think, a very good head coach. I think that's a very good move to bring in a player who has Overwatch League experience, who's now a head coach. I think he is a very big part of what will help this team out a lot, but I don't think they did quite enough to get to the point where I'm confident in saying that they are a top team. I think they're going to struggle a little bit. They didn't make enough moves. I think they still have a couple weak spots on this roster that they need to patch up going forward, but I feel like that is a good start for this team, but they're not quite at a point where I'm ready to put them higher than 16, and that's why I have them where I have them. Up next at number 15, I have the Dallas Fuel, which is an interesting one. I'm sure a lot of people will find this one interesting. With the Dallas Fuel. I think the Dallas Fuel have made a lot of very good moves this offseason. I think this is the best Dallas Fuel team we've ever had. The problem is I think the competition is also a lot better, and I still have some question marks about Dallas Fuel that have led me to not quite yet wanting to put them any higher than 15. I think they're good. I think they've done a lot to improve, but I'm still a little questioning of some of the stuff they have. But the moves they've made this offseason were very good. Of course, they bring in Decay in a trade. They bring in Gamsu. They bring in Doha. They make a much better DPS line. They make a much better tank line. And the question mark that remains is their support line, which is Closer and Unco, which is still pretty good, and they have some time playing with each other. I'm just not super confident in what we saw from Decay last season. He was good. He wasn't amazing. And you have Doha, who I've heard very good things about, but I'm not personally super familiar with him. And the other DPS players are Zachary and AKM. So to me, I look at this team, I look at what this team is. I still have some question marks about it because I don't personally know everything about a lot of these players and this team as a whole. And I think that their tank line is good, but I think that it's also a little bit overrated by a lot of people. I think there's a number of people out there who are going to say, like, oh, this team's incredible. Like, they have one of the best tank lines in the league. And I don't necessarily think that's true. I think that it's a good tank line. I don't necessarily think it's a tank line that's one of the best in the league or anything like that. I think it's a team that I think the expectations need to be set. I'm not the most confident in their coaching staff, and I think we need to see a little more from these players before I say, yes, this is a team that I think is really, really good. I don't think 3 moves is enough for me to say this team is a lot better than they're going to be. So that's why I have them where I have them at 15. At 14, I have the Houston Outlaws. I know a lot of people are not as high on the Houston Outlaws as I may be, but I really like what the Houston Outlaws did this offseason in every single department. It started with the addition of Harsha, which I think is one of the best additions they could have made ever. And they bring in Hureg also as an assistant coach, which is another move that I think is fantastic. Harsha and Hureg, and then they have Dream as another assistant coach. So their coaching staff is really, really good. Then they make moves to bring in Hydration and Blase and Repel and Dumeko and Jexa. They make this roster much, much better. This roster is now really good compared to what we saw last season. You look at where they are now, I think they're significantly better than where they were last season, with a head coach that I have faith in, a tank line that I have faith in, a support line that I have faith in, and a set of damage dealers that I have faith in. There's not really a part of this roster where I say they're really, really, really struggling, or there's a lot of question marks. The big question mark as a whole for this team is how well will some of these Korean players, like Meko, like Repel, and Jexa, so all 3 of them, I don't believe any of them have ever played on a mixed roster team. So how well will these players mesh, and how well will these players work on a team that isn't a full Korean roster? And that's really the big question. You have Hureg, you have Harsha, who have experience. Hureg, obviously a Korean guy, and Harsha just played, or just helped coach a Korean team. I think this is a very good team with a lot of talent that could do really, really well. I just, of course, need to see it. We haven't seen a lot out of the people on the Houston Outlaws since the 2018 season. They have never really been one of the best teams in the league. Obviously, we know Raucus was on Team USA in 2019. Harsha was one of the assistant coaches on Team USA in 2019. So we have seen some high-level play from some of these players. We've seen some accomplishments and some success from some of these players. I just need to see more in total out of these teams, or out of these players. But I think that they as a whole are looking better than what I think the Dallas Fuel are looking like. It's close. I just have more confidence in this Outlaws roster because I think they have a better coach. And I think they have a better roster. And a roster I feel more confident in. And that's why I have them here at 14. Up next is number 13, which is the Chengdu Hunters. Chengdu Hunters made a couple of moves that I didn't talk about because they had not made those moves at that time. Jichirin, Yang Zhaolong, and Gary are gone. They are no longer with the team. And they bring in instead Aiting, Mali, and Lengsa, or Lengsa, I don't really know how you pronounce that. I don't really expect any of them to be starters. There's a chance Aiting is a main tank. He could start over Amon. And then Mali and Lengsa are a support line. They could start over Kyo and Yveltal, but I don't expect them to. I expect most of his team to stay the same, with the exception, of course, of Leave playing in the spot that would have usually been played by Yang Xiaolong. I think Leave next to Jinmu is a very good damage lineup. We've seen a lot of good play from Leave. He's a very good Chinese DPS player. So I think this is a team that will probably be better than they were last season. I think they have a better player. I think now they have an idea of who they are and what their identity is, and I think that's going to be good for them going forward, that they now have a style and they have what they know. And I think they're going to be a team that benefits greatly from playing in China. They're going to be one of the teams that really loves playing in China because they have all the Chinese players. And I think there's going to be a ton of fans just for the Chengdu Hunters because they are Chinese teams. And they're a team with a bunch of Chinese players. They went all in with the Chinese players when none of the other Chinese teams did. And I think, sorry about that, I think that's going to be super helpful for this team going forward because I think they are going to be better as a result. And I think that is what makes this team pretty good. But I still look at them. They didn't make a ton of moves, and they were still the 12th best team last season. And they were okay. You know, they were an okay team, and then they kind of just sat there and they did their thing. So I'm not crazy about the Chengdu Hunters. I'm not crazy about what they've brought to the table. I think they're going to be better. I think they're going to benefit from playing in China. But overall, they're still in a very tough conference in the Pacific. And I think every team around them has gotten a lot better, that I still think the Chengdu Hunters are not going to be quite as high as maybe they hope they can be. But I think they're still a team who has a chance to make the play-in tournament. So I'm putting them here at 13. Next, at number 12, I have the Washington Justice. The Washington Justice are an interesting team. I have a lot of questions about the Washington Justice. I think there's a lot of risk with this Washington Justice team. But when we saw how good they were at the end of last season, it gives you some faith that they know what they're doing. Now, I think this team needs to add some players. I think they need to add a number of players because I don't think that they should be super comfortable with where they are right now. But we have to see what this team does. But we know what they have with Corey and Stratus, a very good damage duo with Tuba backing them up. We'll see what happens with Tuba. I'm not really too sure about that. You have Arc and Aim God as your support line, which I think is pretty good. And then you have either Lulsish and Elevote or Roar and Elevote as your tank line, which is decent. Lulsish and Elevote have played together in the past. They know what they're doing. They've played together for a long time. They're a very good pair to have. But Elevote is the better player of the two. You bring in Roar. I expect something out of that. I expect you bring him in for a reason. So I think this team has some potential, but I think there's a lot of question marks surrounding their tank line with Elevote, Lulsish, and Roar. Roar was okay last season. He wasn't amazing last season. So it's really a question of how good is he going to be on a new team and alongside Elevote, or is Lulsish going to be the person that plays, and how good is Lulsish going to be? I think that's really where we see the big questions with this team. Elevote and Lulsish were on this team last season, but never got the ability to play because they couldn't get their visas. So I think this is a really big question mark of a team, just because we don't really know much about them. We don't really know what to expect from this team. And I think that makes this team a huge question mark in every way. But I think with how much promise we saw them have at the end of the 2019 season, they still keep Corey and Stratus and Arc, which I think are three really good players and three really important players for this team. And I think that we've seen enough, I think, out of what they've done with Elevote and Lulsish and Roar. And Aim God's a very good player. We know about him. There's enough here in terms of just high-level talent, and they have a player that's so good in Corey that I feel confident that they are a team that is capable of making it into the top 12. But I'm not confident enough to put them any higher than 12 itself. That's why I have them where I have them. Finally, for this video, we have number 11, and that is the Toronto Defiant. Now, I know a lot of people that are not that high on the Toronto Defiant. I think that what the Toronto Defiant have done this offseason is very, very good. They bring in Kariv and Agilities and Beast and Surefour and Kelix and Nevix. The biggest question mark on this team is their main tank. Everyone agrees that that's the biggest question mark. Beast is not a player who's super well known. He was a Contenders player. He's good. He's had some success when he was on Fusion University. He was supposed to, or he almost was in the Overwatch League in 2019. He was given an offer by the Chengdu Hunters, but he declined because he didn't want to play for a team that was all Chinese because he was worried about the language barrier. So now he's on this team. I'm confident because when you look at this player and you see a player who was offered an Overwatch League contract in the past and is now in the Overwatch League, I think he's going to do pretty well. I think they should have another main tank to back him up just in case they need one. I think main tank is a position you should almost always have two of. But I'm very confident in this damage lineup. Surefour, Agilities, and Logics are very, very good. You have Mangachu on a two-way contract, so if you need him, you have him. I love what this team has done. Kelix is a bit of a question mark. I was never a huge fan of Kelix on Boston, but he did play very well during the World Cup. So maybe it was just because he was on Boston, and Boston is a dumpster fire, and they were just not treating Kelix well, and Kelix wasn't having a good time there, and there was that whole drama with him and Aim God, and that whole situation that happened that was just really not cool for Kelix and kind of did Kelix dirty. So I think that's a potential option. We'll see how good Kelix is potentially for this team going forward. And then Nevix, of course, on the San Francisco Shock, backing up Joey Hoban for most of the year, but I've heard very good things about Nevix that make me not super worried about him. So I think there's a lot of promise for this team. I think there's a lot of talent on this team. It's just a question of how good can they be. I could see them being even better than this. I could genuinely see them being one of the top 8 teams in the league. But I think the problem is, once again, there's a lot of very big questions surrounding this team and whether or not they'll actually be able to succeed. That I think it's this point where they are going to be placed, because we don't know how good they're going to be. We don't know how well this team will come together. It's kind of this big fan favorite team, this whole thing of like, we're going to put this team together with a bunch of really popular players and hope it works, and we don't know if it's going to work or not. But that is it for part 1. Here is just a look at where my rankings stand based on what this video has been. You'll see this again in part 1, but that is it for this video. So let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. I'd love to hear what you have to say, but that is all for this part. So thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed, consider liking and subscribing. Stick around. Part 1 will be coming on Friday, but that is where I leave. So hope you all have a wonderful day, and I will see you all next time. Bye-bye.